Berserk is a franchise that thrives off the mysterious and mystical. While the latter element was fully integrated into the series well beyond the halfway point, the former has been ever present. The idea that Guts is on a secret quest to eliminate demons wasn't a secret during the Black Swordsman arc, but it certainly evolved into that as the series has unfolded. And, along the way, Miura-sensei gave us literally dozens of plot points that seemingly went nowhere, but somehow ended up affecting his bottom line. In this video, we'll be taking a look at every major Berserk mystery that's yet to be addressed, but we won't be going over things like Guts and Griffith's parentage or the truth about Skull Knight and Void's rivalry. We've made extensive videos on those topics which you can indulge in thanks to our special Berserk playlist, check it out. In this video, we'll be looking at the stuff that Miura didn't explicitly clarify and that might still end up having a major impact on the story's trajectory. So, without further ado, let's dive straight into it. The Black Swordsman, the Behelit, and the Beast of Darkness. Okay, so we know that we just said that we won't be discussing major mysteries involving Guts and Griffith, but there have been recent developments in regards to the former's life that have reopened a massive can of worms. Since the beginning of the series, Miura kept a Chekhov's gun locked and loaded in the form of the Behelit. When Guts was hunting the Slug Count, he found an unlikely ally in his former physician who gave him an even unlikelier gift for his journey, the Count's Behelit. Now, we know that this particular totem belonged to the Slug Apostle because we saw him activated a second time in his life, but what happens to a Behelit after the person it was destined for passes away? As far as we know, a Behelit cannot be destroyed, unless Skull Knight swallows one and adds it to his collection. They can only be created, and once they're in the physical world, they will find their way to the person destined to receive them one way or another. We saw this happen with Griffith, who lost his Crimson Behelit a year before his eclipse and then randomly found it in a lake on the outskirts of Midland right when he needed it. Zod told him that Behelits find their owners at their most desperate hour, the time when they crave the power destined for them, and that's true for all Behelits. So it's a little unsettling that no prospective apostle has attacked Guts to take the one in his possession, and it's even more unsettling to think that no one is probably coming to get it either. The point of creating apostles across the eons was to find able-bodied soldiers for Griffith's army of the end. Right now, there are scores of apostles under his command, and we're not sure that he even needs any new recruits to fill up their ranks. So, what in the world is Guts' Behelit going to be used for then? Well, that's one mystery that might just get resolved real soon. So far, Guts' Behelit has served as an astral radar, letting him know when massive disturbances are created by the God Hand within space and time. It confirmed Slan's presence for him in Kliphof after his brand of sacrifice started gushing blood for no apparent reason. It alerted him to the occurrence of the Great Roar of the astral world as well, and every character that knows what a Behelit is and sees him carrying one wishes fervently that it leaves his hands as easily as he found it. It could be because they're aware of the Behelit's evil nature, or that they know Guts' quest will cause him to seek more power at some point, which could end up with him using the damn thing. The current situation in Berserk heavily favors the latter option, because these days, Guts doesn't really care too much about what's wrong and right. He has lost the love of his life to his evil former master again, and all he wants is the power to defeat Griffith by his own admission. The Beast of Darkness is nothing more than an amalgamation of Guts' malice and desire for revenge, so when we see it untethered in chapter 373, it's a sign that the next time Guts gets in a fight, he might not be as defensive as he's been of late. The Beast exposed his desire for greater power in the aforementioned chapter, and taunted him by saying that his brand and his flesh restricts him. It has tried manipulating him into making a sacrifice earlier in the series too, but back then, Guts' resolve was stronger than his desire for power. This is why the mystery of his Behelit is most relevant to the current timeline of Berserk, because unless Puck is going to use Becci to become an apostle, we don't see any other candidates setting up and filling in for Guts. And if Guts ends up becoming an apostle, well, then the end times might truly be here. The real history of Midland and its royal house. This is an obscure plot point that was introduced in chapter 53 but hasn't been mentioned once since then. In that chapter, while Princess Charlotte was explaining the history of Midland to the Griffith rescue team, she mentioned something that turned us into the Rock. No, not the fact that Skull Knight used to be Supreme King Geiserik or that his city lay sleeping beneath the Tower of Rebirth, much like R'lyeh, where dead Cthulhu sleeps dreaming. We're talking about the actual lineage of the throne of Midland, because interestingly enough, it's the oldest seat of power in the world, and yet no one knows whether its owners are truly related to its creator. Midland was established as the capital city of Geiserik's continental empire. It encompassed the entire middle portion of the continent of Man and was an architectural marvel, all things considered. The current kingdom of Midland is centered on the core of Geiserik's old capital, which is the city of Wyndham, but the geography of Midland is the only confirmed carryover from his age, that and the royal standard. The Midland royal family itself, the House of Wyndham, them has no direct blood ties to the Supreme King because by the princess's own admission, Geiserik died without an issue. Notice that we didn't say heir, we said issue. That's because the eldest male issue of a ruler automatically becomes his heir, but a ruler's heir need not be born of their body or even their eldest offspring. The Mongols infamously held formal gatherings where second or third sons were picked as leaders over their elder siblings, and on rare occasions, rule of the horde passed to someone else entirely. The most notable example of this is Ogedei Khan, who was Genghis Khan's third son, but ended up succeeding him because he was the one who could bring his great work to a point close to completion. Princess Charlotte tells the gang that while Geiserik didn't have any children, out of the several tribes and territories that splintered off from his empire, the Midland royal family claims to have the highest concentration of his blood. This is important because not only does it give them the right to rule over his former capital, it also makes them heirs to his legacy. If any royal family in the world could lay claim to it on the basis of having previously owned it, it's Midland. And that's thanks to its royal family's rather convenient genealogy. Our gut tells us that there's a reason Miura brought up the connection between Geiserik and Charlotte, and we suspect we'll discover that reason the closer we get to the latter's marriage. Even in a world where nothing is how it used to be, tradition and heritage still play an important role. Griffith has exploited those institutions to position himself as the sole savior of mankind. So, finding out that the sole official authority of the only safe haven for humanity has no actual jurisdiction over them will cause a massive upheaval in Falconia's social harmony. And who knows, maybe Geiserik's extended family holds the key to defeating Griffith, considering their deep involvement in the Falcon's life. His supposed descendant put the gears of fate into motion when he lusted after his own daughter, and now she's going to complete that process by marrying the Demon King on Earth. We suppose it's possible Geiserik had siblings or relatives we don't know about who went on to create the Midland royal family after his demise, but we doubt the answer will be that simple. So we wait with bated breath for the day Studio Gaga decides to revisit this plot point, if they ever do, that is. Why Elfhelm disappeared, but Puck and Ivalira didn't. One of the most tragic chapters in Berserk is chapter 369. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to call it rock bottom for our protagonists, because after enduring unthinkable torments and battling unspeakable horrors, they'd finally arrived at a safe place that they could call home, and it was taken from them as soon as it was given to them, with nothing but a single move by a God Hand member. When Griffith rocked up to Elfhelm, we figured he was going to do something like destroy its spirit tree and take Casca with him, but we didn't expect the domain itself to disappear along with most of its inhabitants. Elfhelm was the last frontier for good magic to thrive. It was a place densely populated by elves being led by a massive humanoid elf queen known as the Flower Storm Monarch. Now, it's returned to the astral world with all of its magical creatures, except Puck, curiously enough. The disappearance of Elfhelm took with it characters that weren't even native to the island. For example, Yzma disappeared because she was half Marrow, but Yzma had arrived on the island alongside Guts and the rest of his party. Yes, the dialogue in the series tells us that she had been accepted as a part of the place by its inhabitants, but is it really that easy to become native to a place? And if it is, then why the hell is Puck still around? Unlike Yzma, he's an actual inhabitant of Elfhelm, who managed to leave it by accident, though he'll claim otherwise. His relatives, Pick, Pook, Peck, and Poke are among the first to turn into Vanishing Light, but he's still around, despite being tethered to the same Cherry Blossom spirit tree. The same is true for Ivalira, who should have disappeared even before Puck, considering she was a denizen of Flora's spirit tree mansion and was technically linked to its spirit tree for life. Our leading theory is that it's because their new source of existence is the people they've bonded with, those being Guts and Shirkei in particular. This would explain a lot about Puck and Ivalira's continued existence despite the destruction of their source material, but there is another simpler yet more daunting possibility as well, that their survival is a part of Causality's plan. Puck and Ivalira have come to define certain aspects of their bonded human's personality. Ivalira is Shirkei's greatest supporter and the one person who always encourages her to follow her heart. Shirkei might not take her advice, but she relies on her for magic rituals and pretty much everything else. As for Guts, the only reason he didn't give in to his Beast of Darkness earlier is because he came across Puck at the brink of doing so, and in meeting him, his old self was partially restored. These two could just be sacrificial cows being fattened up before inevitably being slaughtered as an offering, but we would like to confirm that theory all the same. Puck and Ivalira are clearly going to be crucial to the good guys' magical defenses going forward, and maybe their non-disappearance will be explained when that happens. Till then, we want to know what you think made them survive Elfhelm's disappearance down in the comments, because the whole point of this video is to stir conversation. And speaking of causing a stir, What taboo did Flora violate? You'd think that witches practicing taboo magic would be a common thing, considering, they're witches, but Berserk creates a clear distinction between the practitioners of good and evil magic. Not all witches hail from Salem, and even the ones that do will have the odd underling or two that wants to do good in the world. In Berserk's world, most practitioners of magic that we've seen are good aligned, which makes it even more suspicious that one of them was kicked out of Elfhelm for violating a taboo. That person was none other than Flora, and her magnanimity and her usefulness from the Clip-Off arc makes us wonder, what could she have done to deserve permanent exile? Flora was one of the nicest characters in the series. She gave Guts and his friends shelter and protection when she knew doing so would put her in the crosshairs of demonkind. She created a talisman to protect him and Casca from the effects of their brands, and she raised Shirke to become a prodigious mage since she was nothing more than an infant girl. Flora has done more to assist the Black Swordsman party than the group of mages they meet at Elfhelm, and she was on screen for a much shorter duration than they were, which makes the question of her taboo violation molten lava. How can a place as chill and serene as Elfhelm turn against a beautiful soul like her? Well, turns out the answer is illegal resurrection magic if our guess is correct. We've known that Flora and Skull Knight used to be tight in their previous lives based on their interactions in chapter 222, where they act real familiar with one another, and Flora even calls him her old friend. Then, when the crew reaches Elfhelm, Flora's disciple learns that her mistress was banished from a veritable paradise for magic users because she did something she wasn't supposed to. It's hinted in chapter 363 that something was resurrecting her old mistress as an elf. Resurrection magic is not a major topic in Berserk because it's a series that comments frequently upon the flow of life and destiny and how resisting or moving against it can prove to be disastrous. In that chapter, Guts and Shirke witness an interaction between Danon and Skull Knight after seeing the latter's final memories as a human. They are shocked to learn that the former looks just like the Skull Knight's deceased lover from his life as Geiserik. When they ask Gedfring what the connection between them was, he tells them, and then he adds that Flora used to be a disciple of the Lady Priestess of Cherry Blossoms. Theirs was a special relationship. They were as close to one another as atoms are in any substance with mass. But the day that the sun died for the first time, so did the Lady Priestess, and because she couldn't cope with her mentor's death, Flora broke the code. It isn't stated outright what she did to break the code, but the fact that Guts and Shirke both find Danon to be the splitting image of Skull Knight's former lover suggests that Flora resurrected her former mistress as an elf, the most powerful elf for that matter, and this does explain her banishment rather plainly. Interfering in the cycle of life and death is a no-no for any practitioner of the mystic arts, and Flora doing exactly that is enough grounds for her exile. Still, until we're told explicitly that this was the case, all we can do is speculate, and we sure hope that this is one mystery that gets a definite resolution before all is said and done. Whose true magical name will get the good guys in trouble? This might be a detail you missed out on, considering it was briefly explained in a single chapter out of 400 chapters, but one thing we never see anyone talking about is the fact that all magical creatures have a built-in manual override system. All you need to activate it is to chant their real name, and then you, the chanter, will have complete control over all of their thoughts and actions. This little nugget was dropped on our heads when Yzma transformed into a marrow for the first time, and mind you, magic has been a part of Berserk since day one when we first met Puck. Considering the way Ivalira freaked out when Yzma was about to reveal her true name to a menace like Isidro, it's a pretty big vulnerability that all magical creatures must possess. Because if everyone can be controlled with a name, then what's the point of demarking good from evil? But what we really don't get is why this hasn't come into play yet. I mean, we get it. It's yet another setup that will pay off when the story enters its final arc. But the fact that such an important detail was kept from us and then addressed rather briefly, it's suspicious to say the least. It's almost as if Miura was setting us up for a big unintentional betrayal down the line, and don't get us wrong, we still think that might happen. But we don't know if this only works for good aligned spirits or evil ones as well, and we most certainly don't know if, or rather when, this will come back to haunt the good guys. They know better than to steal a person's free will, even if said person was an annoying elf, but we're not sure nicety will have anything to do with the situation if, say, Griffith or his war demons decide to use this against them. Being as close to a god as a human being can be, it's not a stretch to think that Griffith might be aware of the fact that spirits become subservient to those who chant their real names. And if he's able to turn someone like Puck or Ivalira against Guts, he wouldn't even have to get his own hands dirty with regards to solving that problem. The mystery of whose real spiritual name will get Guts into trouble is one that's been gnawing on our minds since we first learned it was a thing, and we're sure it will do so well after we've witnessed the reason Miura planted it in the first place. First God Hand. This one's gonna be simple considering we recently put out an entire Origins video speculating about these guys, but the identity of the first God Hand has quickly become one of Berserk's biggest unanswered questions. In chapter 362, as Guts experiences the final moments of Skull Knight's human life from within the Berserker armor, he realizes that the God Hand he knows and the God Hand Skull Knight knew were completely different, with the only exception being Void. He's the only demon who has been a part of the two versions of the God Hand that we've seen so far in the series. But while we know a lot about the current iteration of the group, the past version remains shrouded in mystery. All of these creatures look vaguely humanoid. Their appearance is more surreal than the current God Hands, as if they're not really humans reincarnated as embodiments of evil, but something else entirely. If that is the case, then who are these guys, and why are they with Void? And if they are an older version of the God Hand, then where the hell are these for? Because we know Skull Knight didn't get rid of them, he couldn't even get rid of Slan in her partially manifested form, so taking care of one primordial God Hand member, let alone 4, feels a bit unrealistic. This is why the identity of the first God Hand is such an important mystery to resolve, because by doing that, we'll understand everything. What happened in the past, why it happened, how it affected the natural order of things, and whether other forces of nature are involved in plunging the world into darkness. We have our theories, of course, which you can discover from our first God Hand Origins video, but let us know yours in the comments down below. Daiba's disturbing secrecy. When we first met the character of Daiba, we got to admit we were glad to see a sorcerer walking the edge of brilliance and deviousness with his magical abilities. Daiba was the wizard general and second in command of the Dread Emperor Ganishka, and during his tenure as wizard general, he concocted spells and rituals that would give the human elements of the Kushan main army everlasting nightmares. Using his knowledge of the astral world, particularly the power of evil, he created demonic animal warriors and hybrid soldiers with the help of his masterpiece, the demonic womb known as the man-made Behelit. Daiba was intimately aware of Ganishka's nature as an apostle. In fact, we learn that he was the guy who handed the Dread Emperor his Behelit in the first place in chapter 303. He went on to use that knowledge to capture numerous apostles and stitch their living bodies together so he could create a vessel that channels the essence of evil. Daiba's greatest desire is to establish a magical kingdom on Earth, and when he was working with Ganishka, they had a silent agreement which would fulfill that desire of his. But now, Ganishka is dead. The physical world is being overrun by the astral world, and it took all of his skills for Daiba to disguise himself as a refugee within Griffith's capital city, Falconia. Despite knowing that the Falcon of Light was using magic to win his battles, Daiba had no desire to follow him or join up with him, which is why he was eager to assist Rickard and Salat with their flight troubles in chapter 341. But a massive shadow has been cast over that decision ever since he decided to not tell Salat that their target from chapter 374 was none other than Guts. When he was recounting the story of his service under Ganishka, Daiba conveniently omitted his role in bolstering the Demon Emperor's inhuman army. Salat trusts him right now purely out of necessity. He doesn't like Daiba, nor does he appreciate his tricks, of which we're sure he's endured plenty, but he also can't afford to part with his magical knowledge, which puts him between a rock and a hard place. Moreover, Daiba wants to use the martial prowess of the mages from Elfhelm by doing them a favor and getting them settled in his home country, and we're sure that isn't going to turn out like a deal with the devil usually does. Daiba knew enough about a Behelit to recreate its effects with living apostles. There's no telling what he might do once he realizes Guts has a Behelit on him, and even if he doesn't manipulate the warrior of Durga into becoming an apostle, we don't think anyone should let their guard down around Daiba, even his self-professed allies. Sure, he's looking out for the world by organizing the magical defenses of his homeland and beyond, but whether he's doing that to protect them or to trap them so he can sell them out later, that remains to be seen. All Skull Knight's warnings about the Demon Child. Is Moonlight Boy mortal? Skull Knight's signature move isn't a sword slash from his sword of actuation, it's showing up when the good guys least expect it and giving them news they don't really want. Most of his warnings have been directed towards Guts, seeing as they're kindred spirits, but there is one warning that involves someone other than the branded swordsman, and that's the one he delivers right after the birth of the Demon Child. In chapter 92, Skull Knight realizes that Casca was pregnant when she entered the eclipse and that her shapeless fetus had been corrupted by evil due to Femto violating her. As a result, her human child was turned into a demonic hybrid, and upon the demon child's birth, Skull Knight proclaimed that it would be best to kill it since its existence was beyond unnatural. He told Guts that even if he doesn't get rid of the baby, it will visit him every time it gets an opportunity to do so, because even demonic children yearn for their parents. And more than that, given that it was cursed to live as a demon, the child was sure to bring woe upon its loved ones at some point in its life. At the time, Guts couldn't really follow through on the recommendation because A, Casca wouldn't let him and B, the sun shined on his demon baby, but he never made a move to kill it in the 2 years he was the Black Swordsman either, and if anything, the demon child has saved its parents from woe rather than subjecting them to it. He was the one who alerted his father to the danger that Casca was about to face at St. Albion. He's the one who protected Casca from all the malign spirits and the blood flow of the dead when she was caught in the middle of the incarnation ceremony. His reward for defending Mother unto death was death, because the demon child nearly spent its life force in keeping Casca alive, but turns out he was due for a transformation. In his final moments, the very apostle who triggered the incarnation ceremony swallowed his dying body and merged it with Griffith's new body of flesh. The end result was the creation of the Moonlight Boy, the little kid that shows up to cuddle with Casca every full moon since the incarnation ceremony. It took a while to piece it together, but turns out whenever the lunar cycle reaches the full moon stage, Griffith loses control over his own body to the Moonlight Boy. Since he isn't in a position to be disappearing every month or so, he kidnaps the source of the boy's yearning, that being Casca. But is this the woe that Skull Knight was talking about? His cryptic messaging necessitates a lot of reading between the lines to fully grasp, but surely kidnapping wasn't what he was referring to, otherwise why would he suggest Guts kill his own child? It's possible that while Griffith is nearly immortal, the Moonlight Boy isn't. If the Moonlight Boy is mortal and can be killed, like the demon child could have been, that makes Skull Knight's comments make a lot more sense. After all, no parent wants to kill their child just on a pure humanitarian level, and Guts and Casca might be forced to do exactly that. Or they might be forced to kill one of them to protect the child, in which case, R.I.P. Casca. Guts might look at the guy as a bad luck skeleton that shows up wherever he's going, but Skull Knight hasn't been wrong once so far, except for when he said Guts would die during the eclipse. So yeah, figuring out what Skull Knight was referring to nearly 300 chapters before the current timeline might seem wasteful, but in a series as intricately plotted as Berserk, is anything a waste? Even a mystery like this? Is there an idea of good? One thing that might have been wasted, though, is the big bad of the entire saga, an entity so abstract and so evil that Miura had to delete the chapter it appeared in from continuity entirely. The idea of evil, introduced at the end of chapter 82, is the beating heart of causality, literally. It's the reason that the God Hand exists, and it's the reason that humans keep seeking meaning in their suffering, even though there really isn't any. Evil is the primary driving force of the Berserkverse, and we've seen how it can touch countless lives without even trying. But that makes us wonder, is there an idea of good out there as well? Because if there is, it sure sucks at making itself known to those who live by its ideals, unlike its evil counterpart. The idea of evil is everywhere in the world. Because it operates through the God Hand, who in turn use apostles to do their dirty work, its reach is universal. But we don't have a clue if an idea of good even exists. If it does, the reason it hasn't exposed itself to the defenders of the world probably has something to do with the overarching philosophies of the ideas. The idea of evil believes in creating order through evil. It wants to turn the entire universe into a single unified entity that lives in eternal damnation because deep in their hearts, humanity knows what it deserves. The idea of evil wants every last soul in hell because then it will have fulfilled its purpose and can stop coming up with new innovative ways in which to explain away a person's misfortune. But if that's true, then the idea of good should be the exact opposite. It should champion the cause of free will and human subjectivity, which it kind of already does through Guts. Guts is the only person in the series who, despite subsisting within the flow of causality, isn't swayed by it. He cuts through the causal current like a leaping fish, defying fate and destiny itself, and perhaps that's why he can be seen as an agent of the idea of good, if it even exists in the first place. Every universe that's ever been created across all of fiction has some sense of balance, but in Berserk, evil seems to be the only thing. We're hoping against hope that something like the idea of good can actually exist, because otherwise, our boys are going to have an incredibly hard time taking Griffith down. They could really use a hand, and not the kind that you're thinking about, you absolute perverts. Marvelous verdict! And that's all for the biggest mysteries in the entire Berserk manga. Keep in mind that this is a subjective list at the end of the day, and your picks don't have to match ours, but we would love to hear about them, so why don't you drop a comment down below and let us know if we missed your favorite Berserk mystery. I mean, we're always looking for ideas for new videos. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more Berserk content, and remember the golden words. Keep on struggling, strugglers.